So last week, I saw the movie The Killer by legendary director David Fincher. And while I enjoyed this movie, I can understand how certain details and themes and symbols could have been missed to make the movie feel pretty confusing, especially the ending. So I want to break down the entire thing to make it as clear as possible and maybe give you some new insights with my research. So to break this movie down, we're going to use 3 themes. 1, merciless efficiency, where we'll discuss the original book this film is based on, the killer's philosophy, the big brands we keep seeing in the movie, and the killer's missed shot in Paris. 2, inevitable human nature, where we'll discuss what led to the killer's wife's assault, the taxi driver's death, the mysterious man at the airport, Hodge's nail gun death, Dolores Stairs' death, the pitbull's survival, and why the assassins are nameless. And 3, beauty of air, where we'll discuss the killer's dinner with the expert, the bear and the hunter story, and the entire ending of the movie, and much more. And if you like this video, please leave a thumbs up and a comment. It helps so much. And if you want to see more of these, please make sure to subscribe as well. Let's get started. Theme number 1, merciless efficiency. To give us the best idea of what this movie is trying to say and what it's truly about thematically, we have to briefly discuss the book that this film is based on. The original graphic novel, also titled The Killer, is about an unnamed assassin who is referred to as the Killer, just like the movie. And this main character is becoming worn out by the criminal world and his job as an assassin. Through various internal monologues, we hear about the boredom he suffers and his lack of direction in life. And just like the film, after a sudden assassination gone wrong, we notice that this killer has a newly emerging hope of finding a greater purpose in life. Just like the book, this film is about a killer's journey to reconnecting with his humanity and finding a more fulfilling purpose. And here's how the film portrays that. Our film starts with the killer very patiently waiting in a vacant space on one of the highest floors of a building in Paris. And for almost 20 minutes, we're listening to an inner monologue from the killer, kind of like Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. And from these monologues, we learn about the philosophy of this main character. He has a very nihilistic and skeptical view on the world. He looks at everything so unemotionally and objectively, as if he is simply observing society and isn't a part of it. We even hear the quote from him at this point: "I am what I am. I'm not exceptional. I'm just a part." And symbolically, the visuals in this opening scene reflect that apart state of mind, as we see him literally looking down on society, physically separated from the citizens beneath him. And he uses his very separated and objective way of thinking to justify his inhuman actions that are completely unempathetic. He can kill whoever he needs to, whether good or bad, as long as he gets paid. He considers how many people are born and how many people die every day, and comes to the conclusion that his work of killing people is actually pretty insignificant when you consider how many births and deaths there are across the planet. We also hear this very important quote from him that explains why he has this psychotically unempathetic philosophy. And it actually ties in with the ending of the movie. And of course, at the end of this video, I'll come back to this quote again. But what he says here is, "From the beginning of history, the few have always exploited the many. This is the cornerstone of civilization, the blood and mortar that binds all bricks. Whatever it takes, make sure you're one of the few, not one of the many." With this quote, the killer is ultimately saying the ones in society who can detach themselves from their humanity have the greatest likelihood of success. Empathy and care for others just won't get in the way of their goals. And the killer is highlighting that these select few inhumane people are the select few who run our world. While he's of course referring to himself because he can earn large sums of money for any kill that he needs to make, he's also referring to the richest and most powerful people in the world. Those who run the organizations and the corporations that keep our economy and society continuously flowing. And I'm sure you're all familiar with some of the inhumane and unethical business practices that many of these big brand owners and executives are capable of. Like digital information theft and sharing, destructive food ingredients, excessive waste, pollution, and many others I'm sure you can think of. This is why we see so many big brand names throughout the film. This shamelessly overt and constant product placement of major corporate brands throughout the movie is highlighting how these unethical brands do truly run the world we live in. We almost need them as regular people. And to add to this point, our killer mentions multiple times in the film how emotion and empathy are forms of weakness. They reduce efficiency and closeness to perfection. But at the end of this monologue, we finally see a moment of imperfection from our killer. He misses the shot. And this is the turning point in the killer's philosophy. This missed shot is the first step in a philosophy outside of perfectionism, efficiency, and mercilessness. And from this point, throughout the film, we see the killer become more and more humanized until he's completely humanized at the end of the movie. And I'll break that process down as we go through the rest of the story. Theme number 2, inevitable human nature. So throughout the film, after that missed shot, we see the killer slowly more and more reconnect with his human nature. The first and most significant reason for him now tapping into his humanity is he is now on a revenge mission. His wife was brutally assaulted. And let me quickly explain what led to his wife being assaulted and who did it. Hodges, the lawyer, worked with Claiborne, the billionaire, to hire the killer to kill the man in Paris that we see at the beginning of the movie. But when the killer missed his shot, Hodges and Claiborne decided it would be the best thing to do to kill the killer to clean up a criminal trail that would lead to them. So they hired 2 assassins who we know as the Brute and the Expert to kill the killer. So when the Expert and the Brute arrived at the killer's home and encountered their wife, she was brutally assaulted for them to get answers about the killer's whereabouts. But we hear from the wife that she suffered through the pain and kept her mouth shut the entire time to completely protect her husband, the killer. So like I said, now after finding out what the Expert and the Brute did to his wife, the killer is on a revenge mission to take out the 2 of them and anyone else that he finds out was involved. He just needs to find out who they are and where they are. And the first thing here that conflicts with the killer's original philosophy is that this mission is a revenge mission. It's completely based on emotion. It's not a paid job. So this motivation in itself is the first step in our killer reconnecting with his humanity. So after the killer sees his wife, he breaks into the taxi company office to find out who drove those 2 assassins from the airport to the house. When he finds the driver, he asks the driver the details at gunpoint. The driver says he drove a woman who looks like a Q-tip, the Expert, and a big scary looking man, the Brute, to the killer's address and waited for them for 2 hours, and then drove them back to the airport, but had no idea why. After the killer collects this information from the driver, he shoots him to make sure the driver can't report this interaction in any way. There's also this suspicion at the airport and on the plane that this dark-haired man is watching the killer, whether a detective or another assassin. But he eventually ends up being completely insignificant to the story. I believe his involvement in the story was simply to indicate to us how paranoid and cautious the killer has to be with individuals who seem to be suspicious, even in the slightest way. The killer then visits the lawyer, Hodges, who hired him. Hodges says he won't give any information on the client or the 2 assassins or anyone who was involved. And he recommends the killer go begin another life with the money he has and forget about this entire thing. And even when Hodges has 3 nails put into his chest, he still refuses to share the information. And I believe Hodges never shares this information with the killer because he knows the killer will kill him no matter what. Similarly to how he killed the taxi driver after the taxi driver gave him the information. Hodges knows better than anyone that the killer always ensures his criminal trail can't be tracked and will show no mercy no matter what. However, when Dolores, Hodges' assistant, says she can give the killer the information he needs, her only request is that if he kills her, he doesn't hide her body. This way, proof of her death guarantees that her children will inherit the life insurance, rather than a disappearance that could be speculated if investigators and the police never find a body. And after the killer does receive the information from Dolores about the Brute, the Expert, and the client Claiborne, he actually respects her request. He kills her, but he leaves her dead body at the bottom of the steps. And although this is still pretty unempathetic, there is still a hint of empathy in there, because the most optimal thing for him to do as a killer is clear the trail of any form of suspected murder. And in that case, hiding and disposing of the body would be the best thing to do. But his empathy is kicking in and it's compromising his efficiency and effectiveness as a killer. Very soon in the story, we get an even more significant example of this when the killer visits the Brute. When the killer visits the Brute's house, he completely spares the pitbull's life. The dog is clearly making his mission more difficult, and it would be most effective for him to simply kill it. Instead, he gives the dog a treat with a sedative in it to slow the dog down temporarily and put it to sleep. Even when he later sees the dog in the house sleeping, you see him think about killing it then and there, but again, decides not to. And even after an intense fight with the brute and killing the brute, when the dog has awoken and is chasing the killer doesn't shoot it. He outruns it by just a few seconds, beating it to the gate. Everything about this killer's entire engagement with this dog in this movie goes completely against his merciless and unempathetic philosophy that he describes at the beginning of the movie. He is slowly evolving into a more human being. And I also think it's probably a good time now to address why the brute and the expert and the killer don't have names in this movie. I'm sure you could probably guess it by now, but these three characters don't have names in this movie because they've lost touch with their humanity. They're no longer completely people. To be a cold-blooded assassin like those three, you have to let go of certain human attributes and qualities like forgiveness, empathy, and emotion as a whole. And once the killer visits the expert at dinner to kill her, we realize that the expert is noticing that the killer's humanity is beginning to emerge from within him. She can see it. And we learn more about this from her as they have this very thematically rich conversation at the dinner table, which we will discuss in great depth in theme number 3, beauty of error. The expert senses the killer's humanity emerging, which makes this conversation at the dinner table the most thematically important conversation in the whole movie. She first asks why he decided to meet with her face to face. He doesn't need to whatsoever. If he was truly the efficient killer that he describes himself as, he would shoot her from a distance without a trace. She asks him this because she knows it's his humanity and emotion that brought him to her table before her death. He needs to look at her and relish in her last moments. He himself can't even come up with a believable answer for why he's decided to sit in front of her. She also tells a story about a hunter and a bear. I'm really paraphrasing here, but the gist of the story is, a man goes hunting and sees a grizzly bear in the forest. He shoots for the bear, but misses, and then the bear approaches him and says, "I either eat you or I force myself upon you sexually." The hunter chooses the second option, to save his own life. And on 2 more occasions, with bigger weapons, the hunter still misses both times, and again chooses the sexual option both times. And the bear asks, "Are you sure you're here for the hunting? Or are you just here for the sex?" And of course it's a funny joke, but more importantly, it's a metaphor for our main character, the killer, and the shot that he missed at the very beginning of the movie. The expert is ultimately suggesting that the hunter in this story may subconsciously be missing the bear on purpose to fulfill some inner desire. And she also implies at the end of the story that our main character, the killer, may actually be doing the exact same thing. He missed that shot in Paris on purpose subconsciously to fulfill some inner desire, just like the hunter in the story and just like the killer in the original novel. The killer is psychologically in desperate need to reconnect with his humanity, and missing that shot in Paris was the first crucial step in making that shift. It's almost as if the expert is realizing this and identifying with the killer's dilemma, since she is an assassin as well. I think this is why she says, "When your time comes, it will be my life flashing before your eyes." I guess that's the closest I'll come to haunting you, knowing that she's about to die, and the life she's lived has been exactly like the killer's up to this point, inhuman. So finally, after the expert tries to trick the killer with a knife in her jacket, and the killer kills her before she gets the chance, the killer visits Claiborne. Claiborne, as I said earlier in the video, is the billionaire who partnered with Hodges to assign the expert and the brute to kill the killer. So Claiborne is the main reason for the assault on the killer's wife, and therefore is the final step in the killer's path to revenge. However, when the killer confronts Claiborne, Claiborne explains how Hodges recommended that the killer be killed. And he didn't actually have any deep need in having the killer killed at all. He just figured it was a good idea because Hodges suggested it. And then he tells the killer, if he lets him go, the two of them will have no issues and can completely forget about the whole thing. And the killer actually takes him up on that. He spares his life. And as a viewer, you would think that this is the most anticlimactic climax to a movie because killing Claiborne would just tie the bow on the revenge. But when you think about it, the killer sparing Claiborne would be the final step in his path to his humanity. I think the best way I can put it is, the story on the surface should end with revenge, but the true narrative underneath ends with mercy, which is the most human thing someone could possibly do. And the movie finishes off with a scene of the killer having a drink with his wife. And the final line in the movie is, maybe you're just like me, one of the many, This line is of course referring to the quote that I mentioned in theme number 1 about the powerful few and the powerless many. The killer is no longer one of the few, cold, merciless, and separated from those beneath him. He is now one of the many, caring, merciful, and connected with those he loves. Alright, that's my analysis. Subscribe for weekly videos, and please send me recommendations. And what did you think about The Killer? I'd love to discuss. Thank you for watching. See you later.